Selma, Alabama is cemented in American history as a place that sparked great change in 1965. But understanding how requires us to look back to the events of 1963, to the bombing of a church in Birmingham, Alabama, which killed 4 young girls, prompting public outcry.
I remember my mom saying this on more than one occasion, that it's immoral when people's children are being murdered to ask them not to do anything about it. And so their wheels started turning to answer the question, what is an alternative that we could work for? Their thinking went along the lines of, well, if we could vote, we could have public officials who are not also Klansmen, and we could protect our children because we would be able to have officials that could advance our interests and certainly keep out people who are trying to murder us and hold us back. So they wrote a proposal for a movement, the Selma Right to Vote movement, and they vowed that they were going to work until it happened on Black people having the right to vote all over the South.
Then, in February 1965, a young deacon named Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot by an Alabama state trooper during a peaceful march. The officer who shot him claimed that Jimmy attacked him with a bottle, but organizers worked to counter this false narrative and redeem Jimmy's character. During that march, state troopers beat Jimmy's grandfather. Jimmy, who witnesses said was unarmed, was trying to protect his mother from the same fate when he was shot. Jimmy died from his injuries 8 days later.
So my dad's original thing was, we need to take Jimmy Lee Jackson's body to the Capitol because I need to ask Governor Wallace, was this a mishap, an accident, or is this your policy to kill somebody?
So, on March 7th, 1965, hundreds of people mourning the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson began their planned 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. They hoped to avoid harm during their acts of civil disobedience, but they also knew the harsh realities of the segregated South and its pervasive racism.
The violence was going to be there. The question is, how are you going to counter it in a serious way? So you could throw some bricks, you could shoot some people maybe, but what's going to happen in response to that versus a really creative, very well organized and disciplined nonviolent movement? And I think that is the common misconception in terms of what nonviolence is. It's active. You think violent, you think nonviolent, which is like the absence of physical violence. But when we're talking about nonviolence in the community of organizers, scholars, advocates that, practice, study, employ nonviolence, we're talking about nonviolence with a capital N. So you're talking about a set of principles, a set of historical examples, historical movements that have been successful. You're talking about a body of work, a body of tools. I think that people would be surprised at how much research folks did, how organized they were about sharing that research with each other. James Lawson talks about that. My mother talks about that. They would make, and this is before computer generated everything, but they would make maps and they would get the statistics on how many Black folks live in this county. And, they were serious.
In anticipation of the violence they would encounter, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee held nonviolent resistance workshops. They practiced responding to antagonization and violence with dignity, song, and prayer, and they made sure the world would be watching.
Of course, they could have just got in the car, they could have gotten in the bus and made it to Montgomery. But to dramatize the issue, to bring out the force of violence from the opposition, is a nonviolent strategy, is a tool of strategic nonviolence to dramatize the issue of this long 2x2 march that we see the images of John Lewis and many others beaten almost to the point of death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It is because of this historical faith tradition that Black Christian leaders, particularly in the civil rights movement, we're using and we're grounded in as principles. And all of those things, the power of sacred music, the power of community, all evident in the sort of civil resistance campaign in Selma.
At the end of that day, now known as Bloody Sunday, dozens of peaceful marchers were injured and hospitalized. Videos and photos of the brutality they endured appeared on TVs and newspapers around the world and revealed state agents as perpetrators of the violence, not just individuals or groups of white supremacists. In particular, images of Black people in their church clothes being battered by white state troopers helped counter attempts to devalue marchers as an angry mob.
They were in their Sunday best because this represented an extension of their Sunday morning service, that this was an extension of their faith in action, and how the dignity that they embodied was challenged and threatened by the systems of authoritarianism and autocracy that continue to expose it. These are not people who are attempting to break the law or people to subvert the law or to circumvent the law. These are individuals who represent the best of American society.
As organizers predicted, exposing these abuses led to widespread outrage that they were able to redirect into action.
One thing about strategic nonviolence is that it invites and welcomes all people, those who are differently able, those who have physical challenges, those who have gender nonconforming identities. That strategic nonviolence allows all of us to find a home and to allow all of us to find a place to be engaged. It allows us to all be on the front line, whereas if you were engaging in a strategic violence campaign, one would need to be trained on how to use their instruments or their weapons. But we all can use our weapons of love to be able to engage in the fight for justice and for peace and equality. And I believe that is what makes strategic nonviolence so important. It's what makes this moment around Selma and heightened awareness, is the fact that there was clear distinction between those who were embracing violence and those who were peacefully, non-violently confronting violent resistance with the power of love, and ultimately those who were engaged in the nonviolent strategy won.
On March 9th, over 2,000 people led by Dr. Martin Luther King marched to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where they knelt in prayer instead of crossing, avoiding further violence from the state troopers at the scene. In response, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued the following statement: Americans everywhere join in deploring the brutality with which a number of Negro citizens of Alabama were treated when they sought to dramatize their deep and sincere interest in attaining the precious right to vote. Days later, President Johnson gave a televised address.
Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
And on March 21st, organizers marched from Selma to Montgomery with the protection of federalized Alabama National Guardsmen and FBI agents. By the end of the 5-day journey, 25,000 people had joined the march, a powerful example of how nonviolent action can make violence backfire.
It's not just about trying to invoke or transform the consciousness of the opponent. It's also to win people to your side. I think that's a part of nonviolence that we don't often see as a victory, is that even if you don't change those who are putting on white sheets at night, you have engaged the demographic of those and the neighbors of those who put on white sheets, and you continue to allow the masses of those who have been untapped and unengaged to now begin to overpower those who become the silent minority moving forward. So I think there's some ways to look at nonviolence as a way to attract, not always to just repel, but to attract more people to your side.
The power of these nonviolent strategies live on today as activists and advocates around the world continue to use these tactics to make violence backfire.
That's a part of our rich tradition, is that even Rosa Parks was inspired by the murder of Emmett Till in 1955, and that's what motivated her ultimately to refuse to release her seat on the bus in Montgomery that led to the Montgomery bus boycott, is that we've always used these moments of triggers and trying to transform the nation through these moments of brutality, of devastation, of death, to transform the narrative, to be able to use that to chart a pathway to the future.
There are always people who want justice. But what you can do the week after George Floyd gets murdered is very different from what you're going to be able to do the week before or 3 years after. And so being aware of that as one of the variables in your strategizing and organizing is really important.
This tradition is one that is not just an ancient wisdom. It's very much so relevant for the times we're living in today.
That what our ancestors have done, a new generation will continue the tradition. So bring your marching shoes, bring your bail money, bring your ID, bring your soul.
We were fighting for racial justice in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were met with sort of police violence. We followed the same principles of nonviolence to allow political violence to backfire and for there to be ultimately a level of justice, if you will, and accountability for the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor, and the system that created and perpetuated the level of violence that ultimately took her life. And so I just want to encourage those who are listening. The fight may be daunting, it may seem daunting, it may seem like we're not making progress, but the moral arc of the universe is indeed long, and it does bend towards justice.